of Philadelphia's response to gun violence. This briefing is for press only. If you're not a member of the media, please log out and watch today's live stream on the City of Philadelphia's Facebook page, or you can tune in on 900 AM or 96.1 FM WURD. We'll begin our briefing with remarks by Mayor Jim Kenney. Mayor, you have the floor. Oh, I think you're still muted, Mayor.
Sorry about that. Good afternoon, everyone. Today, we're going to highlight preparations being taken in advance of the Labor Day weekend and the traditional end of summer. It's been a very difficult summer as our city, like so many across the country, have been dealing with the epidemic of gun violence. Our hearts and prayers go out to the families of everyone affected by this tragedy. Please know that our team continues to work around the clock to solve this crisis. Before I turn it over to Eric Atwood, Senior Director, Office of Policy and Strategic Initiatives for Criminal Justice and Public Safety, I want to take a moment to update you on the city's new anti-violence community expansion grants, which we opened in early August. We're extending the application deadline to September 17th, 2 weeks longer than the original deadline. That's because we understand that this is a busy time for many in our community and many of our community partners with the end of summer and back to school. Many of these community groups are involved in those efforts. This extension is in response to the request from our community partners for more time to submit comprehensive, thoughtful, and collaborative proposals. The extension of the application process will not have an impact on our process to review applications on a rolling basis and distribute funds as quickly as possible. We're still on track to release community expansion grant funding beginning the end of September. As a reminder, though through this program, the city will provide grants ranging from $100,000 to $1 million to community-based organizations that have annual operating budgets below $15 million and a proven track record working in neighborhoods vulnerable to gun violence. So we're asking you to continue spreading the word about the new opportunity that will help Philadelphia be safer. More information in the application is accessible on the homepage of phila.gov. Now I turn over to Eric Atwood.
Thank you, Mayor Kenney, and good afternoon, everyone. Before we jump into updates on our weekend, I want to take an opportunity to highlight one of our evidence-based interventions in our gun violence prevention strategy. Our community crisis intervention program was launched in 2018 and has, since its launch, impacted over 4,000 homes. To kind of let you know a little bit about what's been done over our spring and summer, I'm going to pass it over to our Deputy Director of our Office of Violence Prevention, David Irizarry, and the Executive Director of the Philadelphia Anti-Drug, Anti-Violence Network, George Mosley.
Thank you, Erica. Do we have the slide available? All right, so good afternoon. Thanks again. Like Erica stated earlier, I'm David Irizarry. I'm Deputy Director for the Office of Violence Prevention. I'm on with my partner, Mr. Joe Mosley Jr., who's the Executive Director of our community partner provider, PAN, through CCIP. Before George gives us an update in terms of what CCIP is doing this summer and what he's going to be doing over the Labor Day weekend, I just wanted to give folks a refresher on what the program is and how we operate. Again, what Erica mentioned is we launched in July of 2018. CCIP utilized the credible messenger model in order to try to reduce some of the violence here in Philadelphia. What we mean by credible messenger, these are folks, indigenous to these communities. They're from the city of Philadelphia. They grew up in these communities. A lot of them report at one point in their lives being part of what we deemed the problem and now want to be part of the solution here in the city of Philadelphia. We utilize their report that they have in their neighborhoods they grew up in, and they act as liaisons between community and government. We know that there's historically some distrust there between there. We try to use this program to kind of be that bridge and provide needed supports to communities that are unfortunately under acts of violence. We label this program as our boots on the ground program. We operate, when we were developing this, we looked at the times in which shootings and homicides were occurring the most in Philadelphia. We operate on 2 shifts. There's a Monday through Friday day shift, in which operate from 12 p.m. to 8 p.m. And we have our weekend warrior shift, in which it's Thursday through Sunday. Thursday through Friday, it's 6 p.m. to 4 a.m. Saturday and Sunday, it's 3 p.m. to 1 a.m. Next slide, please. Just a couple goals of the program. Obviously, we're trying to reduce gun violence in the target areas that we are assigned. There's several ways we go about that, three in which we want to highlight. Number one, as we get whiffed of individuals who are involved or can be involved in violence, we try to connect them to positive alternatives. Could be jobs, could be programs, could just be supportive services to their family. I think one of the key ingredients of the program, and I think the most important aspect of what we do is as we get information on neighborhood conflicts, you'll hear our partners of police talk about one of the leading factors of shootings and homicides here in the city are arguments and disputes. We try to get ahead of those things. As we hear about conflicts in the neighborhood, we like to go out, use our teams that have reported these neighborhoods and try to mediate those conflicts. And one thing that sets us apart from other programs very similar is our teams respond to shootings and homicides that occur in their targeted zones, and they service the entire neighborhoods. A couple key performance measures that we have. We average about 50 home visits a week. These are high-risk individuals. These are people who are potentially involved as a perpetrator or a victim, as well as victims in the neighborhood. We visit the homes, ask what they need, try to connect them. Average about 11 incidents per week teams are responding to. Just like to highlight for FY20, which is July 2020 to June 2021, we responded to 511 non-fatal shootings and 111 homicides. Next slide, please. This just kind of gives a little bit of an overview of how we got to this point. Again, we started in FY19. We only started with 9 workers citywide. We've gotten to the point now in FY22 where we have 65 available slots. Earlier this year, at our height, we had 59 folks on the ground. A couple highlights this year. Beginning of the year, we were able to contract our national partner in Cure Violence Global and started training for their staff members. We concluded that training in April of 21. In July of this year, we also selected an independent evaluator for the program, which is the American Institute for Research, also known as AIR. I'm going to transition to George Mosey, who's the executive director of our community provider here, and he can talk specifically a bit about what Crisis is doing this summer and ways they're going to be deployed for the holiday weekend. George?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. We had a special goal this past summer, and frankly, it was to make the summer of 2021 a sharp contrast with the summer of 2020. As everybody on the call knows, in 2020, we weren't able to do a whole lot. In particular, programs and activities that would be used to, give people wholesome things to do had to shut down. That made our work very difficult. It made violence prevention very difficult. And so we wanted to make sure that this year, anyone who wanted to provide activities, programming, had the support that they needed. And so not only were a presence to help those programs get off the ground, but we also were able to provide substantive materials, basketballs, footballs, computers, to make sure that the viable leadership in the community had all the tools at its disposal to help the people in the communities that they serve. If I was to add anything to what Dave has already covered, it would be to talk about our human services program. The Office of Violence Prevention made sure that we were equipped with professionals, people who could supplement the work being done by our boots on the ground. Our credible messengers go out and invariably they run into people who have needs. Certainly trauma is at the top of that list. And so we've developed our own human services program, which includes case managers and human services coordinators who make sure that the people who have those needs are linked with the proper programs so that those needs are addressed. And that's part of our overall strategy as well, to empower communities. Certainly when we respond to an incident, trying to resolve whatever negative impact has befallen the instant victim. But we also want to make sure that that entire community, the entire neighborhood, if you will, has the resources that it needs to get past the trauma. We've been up and running throughout the pandemic. We never shut down, but it's been a very difficult proposition. You can imagine that a program that is designed to develop relationships was hard pressed to do that, wearing a mask and maintaining 6 feet of distance between us and the people we were trying to reach. It also presented difficulties in terms of bringing people on board. As Dave's PowerPoint indicates, we've been growing steadily, and we had hoped to be at 64 by this point. As you can see that back in May, we got close, 59 crisis workers. But since then, we've fallen off again. So we really need people, and I'm going to seize this opportunity to tell everybody who's listening that we're looking to hire. And so if there are people out there who, as Dave said, are indigenous to the city of Philadelphia, who have lived lives consistent with the lives of the people that we're trying to reach, well, the Philadelphia Anti-Drug, Anti-Violence Network could certainly use their help. If you can reach out to us at 215-940-0550, we'll be able to set you up with an interview. And by the way, if you know about a conflict that's waiting to happen, and certainly that's the best posture to be in, to get in front of the violence before it happens so that our people can mediate rather than respond to an incident. Please contact us at our hotline, which is 215-800-4611. Thank you.
Thank you, George, and thank you, David. And with that, I'll hand it over to Police Commissioner Danielle Outlaw.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Yesterday was the first day back to school and full-time in-person learning for many of our Philadelphia School District students. While I know that there have been some anxiety for parents and students surrounding health and safety in the classroom, from a public safety standpoint, we continue to work with the school district, local businesses, and community volunteers to ensure that our students have safe passage to and from school. As we talked about this before, safe passage for children traveling to school was discussed when we explained the Safe Corridors program. And Safe Corridors is a volunteer program spearheaded by the school district of Philadelphia. This program is a collaboration between the district, businesses, and community members that aim to provide extra supervision for students. It is similar to a neighborhood watch program where volunteers can opt to patrol routes and around schools at the start and end of the school day, or even just keep watch from their homes and businesses. Volunteers often work in teams, and they share information and report any suspicious or unusual activities. This information sharing alerts school administrators early to any possible brewing issues between children. So I want to put this contact information out there again. I know we talked about this before, but school started for some yesterday, and I just want to reinforce contact information. Every district school has a Safe Corridors program, but volunteers are always needed. So for more information, please contact Anthony Murphy at 215-519-1965. Of course, it is essential that the community understands that this needs to be a unified effort from teachers to police to community members and parents. Everyone needs to be involved in the safety of our children. In that light, we had a very successful summer with our children engaging in recreational and POW Center programming and activities. While some of these programs will still be available after school, our deployments at rec centers during the day will be redirected to ensure safety around schools. Officers will still be making periodic checks at rec centers and any rec centers where issues have been identified, and we'll see an increase of officers patrolling around these centers. Next, I want to wish all students and parents the very best in their next school year. I know that the isolation that we've experienced over the past year and a half has been difficult for all of us. And as a parent, seeing kids overcome these challenges has been both heartbreaking and heartwarming. The past year and a half has shown us as parents how resilient our children are and can be. The start of the school year and the Labor Day weekend signals the end of the summer season here in Philadelphia. But before the unofficial end of summer arrives on Monday, The city will once again take part in the Made in America Festival. Some road closures took effect on Sunday around the Art Museum area, and these road closures are expected to last until Tuesday, September 7th at 5 a.m. More information on road closures can be found on the City of Philadelphia's website. Please visit phila.gov for more detailed information on that. As it pertains to the Made in America event, we'll be working closely with the Philadelphia Fire Department and the event's private security to ensure the safety and security of concert goers. To make sure that all event participants, visitors to the city, and residents remain safe, we will also be assigning plainclothes and uniformed personnel in and around the event. Again, the safety of everyone is our absolute top priority. Before I close out, as most have been following in the national news regarding Afghanistan, Philadelphia began receiving evacuees over the weekend. And although our role is limited to coordinating and providing security in this operation at the airport, the PPD is deeply committed to ensuring the safety of the evacuees as they transition into their next destination. And I want to use this opportunity to warmly welcome our Afghan allies to our area. I'll now turn this over to Deputy Commissioner Joe Dales, Deputy Commissioner of Patrol Operations, to discuss our recent crime trends and what police are seeing in the pinpoint grids. He will be followed by Deputy Commissioner Ben Nash, who is our Deputy Commissioner over Investigations, who will provide updates on some cases that we wish to highlight. Deputy Commissioner Dales.
Thank you, Commissioner. Waiting for the slides. Okay, there we go. All right, I will start with the citywide homicide and shooting victim stats. Looking at the top of the chart, year to date, as of August 29th of this year, Philadelphia had 1,535 shooting victims. And out of the 535, 355 were homicides. In comparison to last year, homicides are up 18%, 355 this year versus 300 last year. And shooting victims are up 15%. 1,535 this year versus 1,337 last year. And looking at the bottom left of the chart, it shows the motives for the homicides, which remain the same every 2 weeks, and every week actually. The top three motives are: number one, argument; two, drugs; and three, domestic, which is currently up 142% in comparison to last year. Next slide, please. This slide shows the citywide homicide and shooting victim stats weekly comparison. From 8/23 to 8/29, we had 10 homicides, 39 shooting victims, which include homicides and multiple victims, shooting victims, and 37 shooting occurrences. Shooting occurrences is an incident count where an individual or individuals were shot. So we're basically counting the shooting incidents, not the number of victims. In reference to the 10 homicides, one was a delayed case where the date of death occurred on August 22nd and was later ruled as a homicide this week. Next slide, please. This slide shows the comparison between citywide homicides and homicides that occurred in the pinpoint grids. If you look at the top of the chart, it shows the citywide homicides up 18%. And looking at the bottom chart, it shows homicides in the pinpoint grids down 2%. Next slide. This slide shows the comparison between citywide shooting victims and shooting victims in the pinpoint grids. Citywide shooting victims are up 15%, and the pinpoint grids are down 14%. Next slide. Looking at the top of the chart, it shows citywide homicides down 15% and citywide shooting victims down 23% when comparing the current 4-week period, which is from August 2nd to August 29th, with the previous 4-week period, which is from July 5th to August 1st. And looking at the bottom of the chart, it shows citywide homicides down 12% and shooting victims down 40% in the pinpoint grids when comparing the current 4-week period with the previous 4-week period. So as you can see, progress is being made as far as reducing gun violence in our city. Next slide, please. This slide here shows year-end total roof arrests for 2017 through 2020, and the total roof arrests year to date for 2021 from January 1st to August 30th. VUFA is an acronym for Violation of Uniforms Firearms Act. So when I mention VUFA arrest, it means the person was arrested for illegally possessing a firearm. In 2020, we reached an all-time high for VUFA arrests that totaled 2,324. And so far this year, we have made 1,799 VUFA arrests. So as you can see, the officers out there working hard as far as getting these guns off the street and these prolific offenders off the street as well. I would like to point out that this time last year, we had 1,168 VUFA arrests, which is a 54% increase when compared to the year-to-date total. So that's at the bottom of the chart, as you can see. Next slide, please. As of August 30th of this year, 4,039 crime guns were recovered in our city. A crime gun is any gun recovered by the police as part of a criminal investigation. I also want to make note that this number does not include guns that were from buybacks or turn-ins. Last year, we recovered 2,908 crime guns by the end of August. Comparing that number to this year's number year to date, which again is 4,039, we are currently showing a 39% increase, which is 1,131 more crime guns recovered this year compared to last year from January to the end of August. If we continue at this rate, we will reach a total of 6,092 by the end of this year. Next slide, please. And lastly, year to date, 370 privately made firearms, also known as ghost guns, were recovered in Philadelphia. I would like to point out that in 2020, a total of 250 ghost guns were recovered by the end of the year. As of August 30th, we have surpassed that number. This shows a significant increase in ghost guns recovered this year in comparison to 2020 and in 2019. So with that, I will now turn it over to Deputy Commissioner Ben Nash, Deputy Commissioner of Investigations, who will speak about cases we wish to highlight.
Thanks, Joel. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to start off by providing an update on two cases of fugitives that were highlighted 2 weeks ago at this press conference. The first one on the left is to announce the arrest of Terrence Fleming. Mr. Fleming was arrested on August 23rd. And Mr. Fleming had been wanted for a shooting that occurred at 1200 Wagner Street on April the 20th. In that shooting, our victim had been involved in an automobile accident with Mr. Fleming's brother. And shortly after that accident, Mr. Fleming came over, shot him multiple times, and we obtained an arrest warrant for him. He's been arrested. He was actually arrested as a result of tips that we received, which is really helpful, and great work by our partners at the Marshals, Fugitive Task Force, and our homicide investigators. He was arrested in Rocky Mountain, North Carolina. He's still awaiting extradition from that state, but he is in custody at this point. The other arrest that was also we also featured the wanted for Mr. Nishi Johnson. Mr. Johnson was wanted for an incident that had occurred on July 13th at 801 North 10th Street, 10th and Brown in North Philadelphia. He was one of the males who had exited a vehicle and shot our victim who was on a bicycle. Mr. Johnson was arrested on August the 25th by our homicide unit, also working with the United States Marshal Service. So again, we're grateful for the tireless effort of our dedicated homicide detectives and our partnership with our federal partners. You can go on to the next exhibit. This next video that is on your screen, I want to bring attention back to something that garnered a lot of attention back on July 15th. We had a shooting on a Septa bus, and it occurred on the unit block of South Broad Street. It happened on July 15th. The bus driver heard multiple shots. He stopped the bus. Everybody ran off. As a result of a very diligent effort by our central detectives, we obtained an arrest warrant for the man that you see on the screen, Mr. Darnell Still. This is from the night of the incident, video that was captured nearby where our suspect was observed running off of the bus after the shooting occurred inside. Mr. Still was identified as a shooter, and I'm highlighting this at this time because he is still wanted. And if anybody has any information about the whereabouts of Darnell Still, we would hope that they would contact our tip line at 215-686-TIPS, or they can contact Central Detectives. That male is wanted for that shooting. and hopefully we can get him in custody in the very near future. Okay, and this next update, and this is as a result of an incident that occurred on July 8th at the 3200 Moore Street, and officers responded to a report of a shooting out there. We came upon our victim, who had been a Lyft driver, and during the course of operating as a Lyft driver, he picked up a male that we've identified as our shooter. And here's an image of the pickup from Siegel Street, where the initial pickup occurred. After the homicide, after the shooting occurred, our suspect drove the victim's vehicle to Southwest Philadelphia. He abandoned it, and here's an image of our suspect walking down the street, helped us to identify who was responsible for the homicide. A short time after abandoning the vehicle, he returned to the vehicle, lit it on fire, obviously in an attempt to try to cover up the actions that he was involved in. So if anybody has any information on our suspect, we would ask that they contact our tip line or contact Homicide directly. As with all homicides, a $20,000 reward is offered for help in catching that fugitive. Okay, and that was Mr. Ferguson. This last video is from an incident that occurred on March 12th in the 3200 block of Emerald Street. We do not have these suspects identified at this time, but we have pretty good image of their vehicle as well as of them walking down the street. In this incident, and this is an image of the suspect vehicle. Please note that there was a vanity tag in the front of the vehicle. We've not recovered this vehicle yet. And here's an image of the two suspects walking down the street just prior to the homicide. On Emerald Street, the 3200 block of Emerald Street, they approached our victim, who was seated inside of a car. One male fired immediately, started to walk away. You see the gun being placed back into his waistband. Right after that occurred, our second suspect fired multiple shots into the car, killing our victim. And again, as I said, in this case, we don't have the suspects identified. So anybody that can recognize the suspects from this video, and this video will be available on our YouTube channel with some additional footage, we urge them to call our tip line at 686-TIPS or contact Homicide. And again, we have a $20,000 standing reward for information that helps lead to the apprehension of a homicide suspect. And that's all I have. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back to Dina from the mayor's office.
Thank you. Now we will move on to Q&A for members of the press. Because of limited time, only one representative from each media outlet is permitted to ask questions. Reporters are asked to limit their questions to 3 or fewer. Today, we're going to limit topics in the first round to questions related to these presentations. And if there's time for a second round, we'll open them up to other topics. Armando is also available for Spanish interpretation if needed. Please use the raise your hand feature. Which is frozen. Okay, first up we have Layla Jones from Billy Penn.
Hello, thank you. My question is for Deputy Commissioner Nash. I just want to know, with regard to the Terrence Fleming arrest for that April murder, was that a result of tips received after the briefing, do you know, or do you have any idea about the timing of those tips?
Ms. Jones, the briefing was done 2 weeks ago, and it was at some point afterwards that we got information from at least one individual that the family had relocated to another state, into North Carolina, and we followed up on that tip. So whether that came as a result of the information from the press conference or was coincidence, I can't tell you for sure, but I can tell you that the information that helped us to apprehend Mr. Fleming did come after the press conference.
Great, thank you. That was my only question.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Layla. Next, we have Kristen Johansson with KYW News.
Hello. I don't know who can answer this, but I did notice on the homicides that there is more domestic violence related homicides than last year. I guess this may go to Commissioner Outlaw or Deputy Commissioner Dales, but can you guys account for anything in that? Just because we were in the pandemic last year, and that was a time that there was more kind of recorded or reported domestic violence.
Based on my experience with the incidents, a majority of them were outdoors as well. So I could say that the pandemic could have something to do with it earlier this year. But I will say that a lot of the domestic incidents occurred outdoors on the streets. Boyfriend, girlfriend, ex-boyfriend involved, jealousy involved. So those are some of the things that we witnessed and we experienced in reference to these domestic incidents.
And if you recall, media coverage back in the midst of the pandemic, there were lines around the corner outside of gun shops, people buying, crazy amounts of weaponry. And those guns, I assume, go into people's houses. And when difficult times come, sometimes people reach for the gun instead of, leaving the house. So, all these guns that have been sold and are available quite easily is, I think, a major contributing factor, especially in the domestics.
This is a good transition into my next question. This is for the commissioner. Just doing a quick search here, and this is just an example, but doing a quick search here on Nishi Johnson, I see that there was he has, you could say, a record. He was out on bail, it looks like, for a VUFA arrest January, and then committed or was charged with the burglary and then the murder. Going through what I've asked you before regarding the type of evidence that you're presenting to the prosecutors about gun arrests, how have those conversations been with the district attorney's office? I know I've asked you this before, I'm just following up. Do you feel like you have a pretty solid guideline for how you all are handling kind of turning over the evidence so that these cases are pushed through?
Before I turn it over to Commissioner Nash, I want to make very clear, we do everything that we can to track the cases where we believe there need to be serious consequences, or if there's been a revolving door. In some instances where offenders are repeat offenders, and those are the cases that we bring to the district attorney's office's attention. But again, communication is very important for me. Collaboration is very important. All I can do is continue to bring that information forth. But I also think that DC Nash will tell you that there's been some solid conversation around what's expected for these cases in order to push them through and move them forward. Again, we don't know what happens once they matriculate through and they're prosecuted. But Commissioner Nash, you are involved in the weekly meetings. We meet as an executive team, we meet monthly. But Commissioner Nash meets with the DA's office on a weekly basis, and I think you can give some more insight on that.
Thanks, Commissioner. Kristen, to your question, there are a number of factors that result in whether somebody is going to be placed in custody for a gun arrest, a VUFA violation, or not. Our goal in the meetings that the Commissioner referenced is to make sure that after the arrest, that everything that can possibly be done in the follow-up investigation, whether it involves a DNA information or anything to do with social media or obtaining video, is done. So we started this collaborative effort in December. And although I can't tell you how the final results are going to go, what we're seeing is that the very vast majority of the cases are being held for court. So there's a lot of cases that are still pending from the cases that we've been working on. Now, as the Commissioner indicated, there's all kinds of factors in why cases don't go the way we'd like to see them go. Some of them, for some cases, that has to do with something that has been referenced in the past, with a number of cases are built on the strength of witness information. And sometimes we have a hard time with getting those witnesses to come into court. And when those witnesses don't come into court, they fall apart at the court level. So we see that as the greatest failure on why cases go down. But then a lot has to do with regarding a person, the sentence that they're going to get, or whether they're the kind of bail they're going to be getting, has to do with their history. And on Mr. Johnson's case, I don't have his information at the ready to say what precipitated him going through court and having previous cases. It's something I'll look at and I'll follow up with you. But right now, it's a challenge that we face, but we're working hard to do the best we can with our partners at the DA's office to try and make sure these cases go forward. You're on mute.
Still the quote of the year. There's nothing, I want to say drastic, that has changed within how you guys are presenting the cases to the prosecutor's office.
Well, I think one of the differences is that once we started this collaborative effort, we started to work on DNA on all the guns. So the cases are going to be stronger as they go through if there's any dispute about someone being in possession. So that was a significant outcome of our meetings. But beyond that, it's just making sure that the cases are better prepared before they even get to the preliminary stage.
Thank you. That's it.
Okay, thanks, Kristen. Next week, Lauren Make with NBC.
Hi, good afternoon. To the degree that you can you expand a bit on your plans for this weekend, both at Made in America? I know, Commissioner, you touched on that a little bit, and also in neighborhoods. Of course, we saw a very active, July 4th holiday. So can you expand on your plans a little bit for this weekend and what folks can expect?
Sure, Joel.
Yes, how are you? So starting with the Made in America, we have been planning for this for the past several months now. We will have uniform as well as plainclothes officers inside the venue, as well as on the outside of the venue as well. We have officers on bikes, officers in cars. Our helicopter will be up. They will be our eyes in the sky. We will have rapid response teams in place as well to respond if necessary, both inside the venue and outside the venue. In reference to the districts and divisions throughout the city, we also have officers. Some officers are coming in on their days off to supplement the shortage due to the fact that we have to make sure we have a police presence at the Made in America event. So some officers will be working extended tours. Some officers will be working on their RDOs. So we will continue to focus on our problematic areas and also our problematic people as well. We also will have response teams within each district. We will be monitoring pop-up block parties who were not approved for a permit. We will be monitoring that. We will be monitoring house parties, these Airbnb parties. So we're going to be pretty busy all weekend. So we are prepared for the weekend.
Thanks. And to follow up, just on sort of where we are in the calendar, and the commissioner talked a little bit about kids going back to school. How does that affect your work now? Because you've got young people who are now interacting in a different place, in a different way than being in their neighborhoods all summer. How does that affect, how you work now going into the fall and, the way you monitor things?
I think it's actually a little bit more helpful because when we didn't have kids in schools, we didn't have those warm touch points. Obviously, we have our partners over, that are responsible for school security, but with kids not being in one centralized or localized place, it was very difficult to have any accountability of where the kids were. Made it a little bit easier with the recreation centers, but again, every kid didn't go to a rec center. So now that we have the traditional touch points back in play, again, working through our partners and very, well-established lines of communications with the school district, I think it makes it easier for us to know where kids are, hold, those responsible for them accountable, and then to communicate any issues that we see and be preventive, as opposed to, again, in general, not knowing where kids are. Where if you notice during the summer, my messaging was be nosy, know where your children are, ask questions, so on and so forth. And that's because we didn't have those traditional brick and mortar locations for us to have check-ins. And again, those warm touch points. So I think it makes it a little bit easier for us.
Thank you. Just one more quick thing. On one of the slides that you were showing, it showed citywide shootings, I think up 15%, pinpoint grids down 14%. Can you explain what that tells you?
So what is it is a combination of possible displacement. It shows that we are pretty much well policed within our pinpoint zones, which are areas that are experiencing high levels of gun violence, which common sense would tell us we have to have more police in those zones. And not just showing the police presence in those zones, we also implement and carry out several initiatives, law enforcement initiatives within those zones. The citywide numbers are usually higher due to the fact that the city in itself is larger grounds to cover opposed to these pinpoint grids. But outside those zones, we also focus on and we look at data. Data takes us there. We look at areas that are experiencing high levels of gun violence outside of the pinpoint zones, and then we'll make the necessary deployment within those areas. Also, too, again, we just don't put police officers in those zones without implementing initiatives, trying to find out what's happening within these areas, what's driving the crime in these areas. And we work with our local, state, and federal partners. As you can see, CCIP, Dave and his team, they also assist us within these zones. And also the roadmap to a safer community also assist us with covering these zones. When I say cover, meaning that any environmental issues or social issues, they help us out with those issues and provide the necessary resources to address the problems within those areas. So hopefully I answered your question.
Yeah, I think so. I may follow up later, but thank you.
Okay.
All right, thanks, Lauren. Next we have Mensa Dean with the Philadelphia Inquirer.
Good afternoon, everybody. My question is for, I guess, the commissioner and the other police officials or whoever wants to take it. At this time of record homicides and shootings, despite the fact that they are going down, they're still record high. We have a situation here where we have a vacancy issue in the police department with officers and with 911 dispatchers. The police say that, according to the numbers I got recently, that the department is budgeted to have 6,380 officers, but only have 6,009, which is 371 vacancies. And as for 911 dispatchers, they're budgeted for 353, but have 252, which is 99 vacancies. So it would seem that when you're trying to drive down these numbers of homicides and shootings, you have less personnel to do it. So the question is, what are the factors that are driving these vacancy numbers? What is the department doing to close these hiring gaps? And do you consider where you are right now with your personnel to be a crisis?
Hi, Mensa. Thank you for that question. We're definitely at critical numbers. In addition to dealing with regular attrition, it's no secret. We covered this before. I think last year we saw larger numbers of people who were eligible to apply for retirement doing so. It's not just here, it's all over the country. We do have, and this was prior to the pandemic, we had a large number of officers that were out on long-term injury, something that we are, trying to address, via other means. But we know that's what the landscape is. Same thing with our dispatchers, right? You mentioned that we do have vacancies. The good news about our dispatchers is that, with this last budget cycle, our authorized strength increased. And so that's where that vacancy rate or that vacancy number came from. We currently have a class that's going now. We have 2 more classes of dispatchers that are expected to begin in October and then also in December. In the short term, however, there is voluntary overtime during the week. And then unfortunately, there's mandatory overtime over the weekend in order to cover these shifts. But we know that that's a Band-Aid approach. We know that everybody doesn't want to work overtime. We know that there are a lot of single parents that are impacted by the increase in work schedule. And so because of that, that's why, again, that's one of the main reasons why we went this last budget cycle to ask for more bodies. So we didn't have to continue to stretch people thin, but it takes time to train. So with all of that said, looking at all of these factors, again, we're doing everything that we can to be diligent about our hiring. efforts, our marketing efforts, meeting people where they are, making sure that we reflect these positions when we are marketing to show that you too can be this. Gone are the days where you see officers solely rappelling out of helicopters or, scaling walls, jumping out of buildings, because that's not the only thing that we do in our roles. And we want people in the community. We just last week had an event out in the community, letting folks know that you too can do this, whether you have if this is a second career, a third career, or other things. We are making ourselves available so they can ask those questions and be more approachable so that folks know that they can relate to the people that work here. So there's a lot of things that happen behind the scenes. But again, you're absolutely right to your point. I think police have always been asked to do more with less. We've had to be more creative in 2020, but we have implemented some short-term measures that we know aren't going to work for a very long time. It doesn't mean that we've stopped our hiring efforts. We're moving forward with those on the officer and the dispatcher end. But it's a very real issue, not just for us here, but for departments all over the country.
Commissioner, can I just follow up?
Yes, please.
You said the new budget gives you more positions to fill.
Yes, we got 75 additional dispatcher positions. So the authorized strength for our dispatchers increased because we went and asked for those positions to bolster our staffing in dispatch for that very reason.
So you're saying that accounts for the lion's share of the 99 vacancies right now?
Correct.
And you've got classes for dispatchers in October and December? Yes,
October and then another one in December.
So what about the police? What accounts for almost 400 vacancies? I mean,
well,
more than we always have vacancies, but not that many.
No, there's been that many. So again, it's vacancies. Now, I think you're counting the numbers of people who are here, but aren't necessarily filling their seats. So there are a lot of people who are out on long-term injury status. That's included in that number. So we have the people, they're just not here. We can't use them. So go ahead.
I'm sorry. Just speak to the people who called 911 and couldn't get through. And we don't know how many there are, but anecdotally, they're out there. And I know some of those people.
Yes.
And they literally called 911 and the phone has rang and rang and rang and no one has answered that phone.
So again, we've covered this before. This is an ongoing issue that we are working very diligently to address. We are encouraging people not to hang up. Someone will answer the call. It might not be on the first ring or a second ring. And I know when you're in crisis or experiencing trauma or in need of help, seconds can seem like an eternity. Our goal is to make sure that we answer these calls in a very short period of time. However, we know that, there's a few factors that's increasing our response time with answering these calls. A couple of them have to do with the fact that we're asking more questions now on the front end when we're taking these calls as it relates to our mental health screen. And then also there's COVID-related questions that we ask. In addition to that, sometimes calls require transfers from one department to another. But with all of that said, we're still asking people not to hang up. Someone will always answer the call. And just because it doesn't happen within a matter of seconds, it doesn't mean that there's no response. So I want to be clear in that, but I also want to reinforce that people should not hang up.
The public also has a responsibility not to use 911 when they can use 311. And that's a large number of calls that really don't belong in 911 to begin with, which clogs up the system. So people should, if it's not a real emergency, people should be calling 311 instead of 911.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mensa. We're going to move on to Saj Purple Blackwell, and this is also a final call for questions. We do have a few minutes for a second round if there are further questions.
How you doing? And good afternoon, everyone. We do know that the gun violence is still at an unprecedented number, but the fact that the gun violence in Philadelphia is on a down tick, although we're not celebrating right now, do we attribute any of that to any part of community collaboration? Or I know we hear a lot about the homicide detectives doing a great job, but is any of that an increase to community involvement?
I believe so. Yes, no doubt about it. I believe so. For example, in West Philadelphia, Christie Rec, we had numerous shootings earlier this year and also last year, but by the captains, the communities getting involved. state representative, city council members, the community itself getting involved. Yes, I believe that had a big impact on gun violence being reduced within that particular area of the city. So no, I definitely believe that's what's happening. Also, what I'm noticing too, I'm starting to see witnesses coming forward and complainants actually working with the investigators, giving up information in reference to who are committing crimes. I will say that I see a difference, not a big difference, but I'm seeing a difference. So every little bit helps. So we're sharing with you what we're doing on our end, but other folks, they're doing their part as well. So if we keep this up, I'm sure these numbers will continue to go down.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And then if Sister Atwood is still online, in regards to the safer corridor collaborations with the police and the community, with the school districts, is there a way to get that information more out to the people? I mean, I was one of the lucky ones who received an email, but talking to some of my neighbors, they actually don't even know about the safe corridor. So how can we increase that message through the community?
Sure. Yeah. Hey, Saj. Erica here. We are working with, particularly, we've identified the schools that have the greatest need, are the most vulnerable to violence. There's high schools, those middle schools, and those elementary schools, and we're going to do kind of some targeted outreach in those neighborhoods with regard to getting volunteers and community organizations engaged. What I want to stress in our volunteer recruitment is we need kind of groups of people. So if there is a faith-based congregation or a chapter of a fraternity or sorority or a group of friends, we would like folks to volunteer in pairs or in groups. So we want to encourage folks to continue to volunteer, but think about your social networks, think about groups that could be engaged and really come forward as a group so we can train and pair folks up to keep our kids safe as they go to and from school.
Thank you very much. And then lastly, my question, I guess, is for any of the commissioners on the line. But in regards to the lack in or the drop in the police force, is it being, there's the rumor wheel going on that basically because Larry Krasner has been actively prosecuting quote unquote dirty police officers, that did attribute to a lot of the decline in the police and in our workforce at the police department. Would you think that that's true? And then how can you combat that moving forward?
Honestly, I'm not even really sure how to answer that because, what people will tell you at the dinner table might be different than what they tell you during an exit interview. So, it's very difficult to speak with certainty as to if that is contributing to our folks leaving. I will tell you, though, that it's a very real concern that I have heard from officers that are still here. They're not necessarily saying that they're leaving, but there is a lot of anxiety around what will happen to me if I do, or if I make a mistake, or just whatever. There is very real. We're human beings, right? And we have this is a calling. This job is a calling. We don't sign up to do this job for pleases and thank yous. And so the only thing that I can continue to do as a leader within this organization, I can't speak for what other people do, but is to remind them that they will be supported when they do the right thing. They will be supported when they fall on their training. And again, there's a difference between mistakes of the mind versus mistakes of the heart. And there has to be some differentiation there. But it is, I will tell you, for everyone, whether it's the narrative at some point that where we see more people at times reticent to publicly support their police. I won't say that that's the case here because people very publicly support police, but it's not like that everywhere. Again, we don't do this for accolades, but sometimes when you hear more negatives in the narrative as it surrounds police in general, as it opposed to positives, is something that chips away at you. And it chips away at any human being because, again, these are relationships. And so whether it's that one particular factor or there's other things, I mean, we'll never know for sure because people don't necessarily put that down as a reason when they choose to leave. But I will tell you that this is a very critical time, considering everything that we've gone through in the last year and a half, specifically whether it's things related to pandemic, related to the unrest, related to our staffing levels, related to the increases in the homicides and the non-fatal shootings that we're seeing, everybody needs support. Everybody needs to hear what's working well. Everybody needs to know about any constructive feedback, and it needs to be done very publicly. So I appreciate you asking that question. I think that's but one part of it. But again, I want to remind people that it's our officers that are scooping these victims off of the street and getting them to the hospital and ensuring that their lives are saved. It's our officers that are seeing this on a day-to-day basis. So we can't poo-poo or forget about officer health and well-being, because it's just as important, because these are all human beings behind these uniforms and these badges.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Final question is Argenis Figueroa with Univision.
¿Hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Sí, voy a necesitar, Armando, tu traducción, por favor. Sí, mi pregunta no es relativa a la violencia armada, pero es de la violencia en las prisiones, y quería preguntarle al alcalde que familiares, le pregunto al alcalde que familiares y detenidos en el CFCF han hablado con nosotros sobre las condiciones dentro de la prisión y el trato que los oficiales le dan a los detenidos. Ellos califican esto como un infierno. ¿Tiene conocimiento, alcalde, de lo que podría estar pasando dentro de la cárcel y entendiendo los desafíos del Departamento de Prisiones?
The first question is for the mayor. Mayor, we are talking about violence, but this time the question is about violence in the prisons. We have spoken to relatives of detainees at the CFCF, and they tell us that their conditions and their treatment are a hell. Do you know about this situation, and knowing the challenges that they're facing, what can you say about it?
First of all, we have to acknowledge that we cut our prison population basically in half from what it was in 2016 to what it is today. We do have some issues relative to the prison doors that were being repaired now. The inmates there had done some things to the doors which made them somewhat less than operative, and we're working on that now. When I first came in becoming mayor, they were triple selling people. People were 3 in a cell. We're now single. We're now with that. We're not doing that anymore. We've had some issues relative to our correctional officers, which we're working directly with. I've met with them myself to try to get some people, back into work. We've had a lot of people calling out, which creates situations where inmates cannot do things they're used to by getting out of their cells without the appropriate coverage. So we're working on trying to get our prison guards back to work and also get more prison guards hired to give them some relief. It's a very difficult job, and like police officers, it's a very stressful job. So we're doing our best to work with our staff there to address the problems that they've brought up, and trying to work to get. We went through COVID. Went through a pandemic in the prison too, so it was really difficult circumstances that we're trying to work our way through.
Argenis, pese a que reconocemos de que la población en la prisión está teniendo problemas, queremos que quede claro de que hemos reducido la población penitenciaria a la mitad de lo que encontramos el año 2016 a la fecha de ahora. Ha habido problemas específicamente con las puertas de acceso que algunos internos dañaron y se están reparando y han sido reparados, y obviamente no han estado operativas. Y también quiero que quede claro que cuando ingresé en el puesto de alcalde en mi primer periodo, encontramos que estaban apiñados 3 internos por celda, y eso ya no sucede nunca más. Bueno, no está sucediendo. Tenemos también problemas con oficiales, y yo mismo he tratado de corregir esta situación. Hay gente que ha estado no presentándose al trabajo, y obviamente eso hace que los internos no puedan desarrollar sus actividades normales. Estamos tratando de lograr que los guardias regresen, también contratar a personal penitenciario, que no es algo fácil, no es una profesión fácil también, hay muchos factores estresantes para ellos, y estamos trabajando para resolver este problema, recordando también de que ha habido la crisis de la pandemia del COVID, que también ha afectado a las prisiones.
Ok, muchas gracias. Mi siguiente pregunta puede ser para la comisionada Outlaw o cualquier funcionario de la policía. ¿Cómo pueden tener alguna información los familiares de los detenidos que han muerto en custodia de alguna prisión y que sienten que sus casos están siendo olvidados porque dicen que la unidad de crimen o de homicidios no se comunica con ellos.
This question is for Commissioner Outlaw or anyone from the police, and this is in regards to the request of relatives of detainees. They seek information about their relatives who have died in custody, and they seem to think that their cases have been forgotten by the Homicides Division. So what can they do and what can you tell them?
Commissioner Nash?
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner. So we investigate any in custody injury or death by a special unit within the Detective Bureau called, it's our officer involved shooting investigation unit. That's been the procedure for a number of years now. They are all investigated very thoroughly regardless of the extent of the injury, all the way up to if they are deceased. There is supposed to be, and if you have any information about a lack of communication with the families, please contact me directly. But I know that our OISI unit works closely with the families to keep them updated on the entire progress of the investigation. We take every one of those investigations very seriously. And we have had a number of tragic incidents that have occurred, and our investigators from the OISI have made arrests in a number of cases. So anytime that the families are feeling like they're not getting any kind of service from the department, they can reach out to us, or if you have information about it, let me know, and I'll make sure that that information is conveyed to them.
Thank you. Nos responde el comisionado Benjamin Nash de que nosotros investigamos todos los eventos que resultan en lesiones o en muerte de las personas que se encuentran bajo custodia. Tenemos un buró especial que se dedica a ello, que es el Buró de Investigación de Tiroteos. Investigan esto profundamente y sin importar el grado de lo que haya sucedido, si haya sido lesión o haya sido una muerte. Si hay una falta de comunicación con las familias o requieren información, pueden contactar con el buró, la OSI, y para darles a las familias una actualización del avance de la investigación en todos los casos que nosotros tomamos muy en serio, y ciertamente ha habido un número trágico de eventos que se están investigando, pero se han dado también arrestos al respecto. Si alguien sabe de algo o necesita mayor información, que se comuniquen conmigo o con el buró de la OSI. Gracias.
Okay. ¿Dónde se pueden comunicar? ¿Hay un correo electrónico, un número de teléfono?
Commissioner Nash, is there an email address or a telephone number that they could use to reach you?
Yeah, I'll get it to you offline. I'll get you a general number.
El número luego, Argenis.
Okay. Muchas gracias.
Igualmente.
Hey, Argenis, you're good?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you, everyone. That concludes today's briefing. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks on Wednesday, September 15th. Take care.